What's up guys, welcome back to another build video. In today's video we're going to be building a new roof rack for the 3rd gen, but not just any roof rack. We're basically going to be replicating a Prinsu roof rack. I've always really liked their roof rack, so I figured I'd try to build one for myself and see if I could save a little bit of money in the process. I'm super happy with the way this one's turned out. It's probably one of my cleaner builds to date. So before we get into the build, let me show you my old roof rack that I had on, and then we'll get everything torn down and get into this build. I built my current roof rack several years ago, soon after I learned how to weld. I built the roof rack, and then I built this Gobi style ladder. There's my old one over there. This is my new one. If you haven't seen the video on this guy, definitely go check that out. Basically all I did, this is 3" by 3/16 inch steel, 4 feet long. And then on the back side, I welded on some angle iron on the top and the bottom to create mounting locations to work with the factory tracks, and then to have different mounting locations for my crossbars. The crossbars are just 1" square steel tubing, 3 of those. I think this roof rack looks great. It's held up great. It's super strong, but I'm thinking I want to do something a little bit better. I really would like to do a full length roof rack, just like the Prinsu or the Victory 4x4 racks. They go all the way down and then match the contour of the roof itself. And I also want to do a little wind deflector right up here to knock down any noise. If you have a roof rack with square bars, you'll know that they make a lot of noise. One thing that's funny is when the roof rack is totally empty, this makes a ton of noise. But if I put a rooftop tent or carry anything up here, the noise totally goes away. So today we're going to be rebuilding the roof rack. I have some long pieces of 3" by 3/16 inch steel that are going to be my pieces that run across. So let's get into this build. To get the factory roof track out, we just have 5 T25 bolts. And these come out pretty easily. Now we should be able to just lift up. Yep. Oh, it's filthy. We'll have to clean that up. Alright, old roof rack. Roof tracks are off. Cleaned up the roof, looks really good. I'm going to start by measuring how long we need to make those main rails first. We'll build those rails, and then we'll build the mounting brackets that will fit up to the original mounting locations for that roof track. Looks like 86, 87 inches is going to be perfect for this build. Alright guys, for the 2 main rails of our roof rack, what I'm using is some 3" by 3/16 inch plate steel. These are 6 feet long. I need 2 of these to be about 87 inches, so I'll cut some sections out of this 3rd piece, and then we're going to weld them onto these 2 pieces. Now the reason I'm doing it this way is just for cost savings. I got all these pieces on eBay for a really good price. I did search around locally, but I was not able to find anything that came close to the prices I was able to get on eBay. That's not even including Lowe's. I would not recommend getting any steel at Lowe's because you're just looking to get ripped off. For example, a 4-foot piece of this steel at Lowe's is $30, and one of these 6-foot links was $17 on eBay. So all this steel, including shipping, was much cheaper than I could have found it locally or at Lowe's. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to cut some sections out of this 3rd piece and get them welded to these pieces to get 2 87-inch links. Alright, we got the flat bar all clamped in place. Metal's cleaned. Got my little chamfer there that you can see so I can get good weld penetration. Let's get this thing welded up. Just in case you guys were wondering what welder I'm using for this project, I'm using the TIG 250P AC/DC welder from YESWelder. Just for the record, I did pay for this unit myself and I've been very pleased with it. And the only reason I'm using a TIG welder for this project is just because that's what I'm learning right now. I already know how to MIG weld, so I'm forcing myself to use my TIG welder for all my projects just to learn the process. But if you're in the market for a new welder with maybe a little bit more flexibility than this machine, I'd highly recommend you go check out the MIG 205DS from YESWelder. This is their multi-process machine. It does MIG, stick, and TIG all in this one machine. It can also be hooked up to 110 and 220 power, which is really cool. Just for transparency's sake, YESWelder did send me this product to show you guys, so it is a sponsored product. And I will be doing a dedicated video in the next few videos, just showing you guys the pros and cons and how to set it up and all. But yeah, just want to show you guys this. I will have an affiliate link in the description below if you're interested in checking out their products. All right, back to the build.
All right, I think our piece looks really good. It's nice and flat, straight. I'll come back towards the end and make sure you can't see any of that transition at all. So let's move on to the next one.
All right, now that we have our 3-inch flat bar to the length we need, I'm gonna get it up on the vehicle. We're gonna measure the front and the rear. We're gonna need to add a little bit more metal to the front and the rear to match the profile of the roof line. I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so I want the two main rails to fit the contour of the roof line. So what we'll end up doing is just measuring straight down to where it contacts, and then we'll end up cutting out a triangular shaped piece of steel, probably about 15 inches long. And then we'll figure out the contour of the roof, and then we'll shape up that piece of metal. So it's about, I don't know, 19, 20 inches.
Instead of cutting up good steel, I think I'm just gonna recycle my old rack. I won't have a use for this after this rack's built. So I'm gonna get these mounting points cut off. We'll get the paint removed and chop this piece up how we need to.
Finally. There we go. It's the piece we needed. All right, to get the contour of the roof line just right, I'm going to take a piece of plywood, or you could use cardboard. I'm going to put it below the roof line, and then just using a pencil, starting where I want the rack to start, I'm just going to trace out along that edge. Now that I have that traced out, I can just cut my piece of wood or cardboard, make sure that that fits our edge, and then we can transfer this over to our rail once that's all nice and perfect. All right, I cut out my plywood. You can see that this fits perfectly. And then we'll get this transferred over to our rail. All right, now with our railing back in place, we can take our template, get it back. Now we can mark exactly where that extra piece of metal goes. I'll cut this extra bit off, and then once I have everything welded up, I should be able to transfer this shape straight to our metal and then cut that back out again.
All right, we got our steel all prepped, cleaned up, ready to go. I do have a chamfer all the way down this edge, and this just allows us to get really good weld penetration, because we're going to come back and we're going to grind this weld down, and without that chamfer, this joint would not be very strong at all. I'm going to tack it on this side, flip it, tack it on the other side, make sure it's nice and straight, and then I'm going to do shorter welds before flipping it on each side, and that way these two pieces don't start warping. If you just weld up one side, it's going to pull this piece in one direction before you have to go on the other side, and it's not very easy to straighten back out, especially with 3/16 inch steel. So yeah, start getting this thing tacked up and weld it in place. We got the contour for the roof line cut out. I really wish I had a plasma cutter because that took forever, but I made it happen with the cutoff wheel. Wasn't that big of a deal. I also want to mention that I did a lot of work off camera. It's a bunch of back and forth between the table and the vehicle, grinding this down to make sure it's absolutely perfect. I don't want you to think that I just cut this once and it was just a perfect fit up from the template. I also ended up adding some metal. I think my original piece ended right about here. If you look right here, you can see this thin line that runs like 10, 12 inches. So what I did was I used my welder. I ran some beads across here, and then I reground it just to get that transition nice and smooth. So I think I end up all total from the end going out about 34 inches or so. But that really wasn't that hard to do, to add that steel and then and grind that down. And I know I have a bunch of little pits and dings and stuff from all the welding, but I'm going to show you guys how to clean that up so you can't see any of that once we go to paint it. So yeah, let's get this thing on the vehicle and I'll show you how it looks so far. Alright, this is what we got so far. My piece is just held up with 2 magnets there. You can see the contour. I think it looks really nice. It took me a while to get it perfect, but I'm really happy with that. And then also back here, I was going to weld a piece of metal here and then shape it up because the rear does slope down just a little bit, but that gap is so small that I don't think I'm going to worry about that extra effort there. And I'm not going to leave this square. I'll eventually shape this somehow. And then up front, we're going to cut this at an angle for the wind deflector, and then we'll round off the edges so that looks really nice and everything. But now that we have this contour just right, what we'll do is we'll weld up the other side, and then we'll use this piece as the template. That way they match up perfectly, and we can go from there. So let's get that other side welded up and matched to this piece. Super happy with the way that looks though. Before I take this off, I kind of want to figure out this angle that I want to cut through here. Probably around the edge like that. I'm just kind of freehanding this right now. Let's see what this looks like. I think it could go back just a little bit more, honestly. That off like that. Yeah, I like that. I think that looks really good. I'll get that cut out, and then we'll match the other side to this. Yeah, I really like that shape. Might bring it back just a little bit more, but I think this looks pretty good. Just kind of freehanding it. Let's weld up the other side. Alright guys, we have the 2 rails perfectly matched up. Really happy with the way this turned out. But man, this was a grind. No pun intended. I'm sure there's an easier way to make this part. But like I said, I'm learning all this for the first time. But I'm happy with the way that turned out, given the tools at my disposal. Now we're obviously not done with these rails. We still have a lot of cleanup work to do, but we'll save that towards the end. The next thing we have to do is figure out how I'm going to mount the rails to the vehicle, and also the crossbar locations. We're going to be using some aluminum extrusion bolted directly to the rails, so we need to figure out where we want to mount those. Alright, now it's time to figure out how I want to mount the roof rack to the roof. But before we do that, I do want to mention I'm going to be using this 10 series aluminum extrusion for our roof rails. I got this from tnuts.com. I'll have these linked in the description below. This is 10 series aluminum extrusion, 1x2. I bought 7 of these for this build. They're about $18 a piece. But if you wanted a cheaper option, I'm sure you could figure out a way to use Super Strut as the crossbars. But I've never used this aluminum extrusion before, and I wanted to try that out. Now, one of the simplest options to mount up this roof rack is just to make a little bracket that looks something like this.
You'll just need to measure how tall you need this bracket to be. But it's going to mount directly in the factory bolt hole location, and then it mounts to the aluminum extrusion. The problem with this is you don't get to choose where your crossbars go. They have to go right on top of your factory bolt hole locations. Also, your two main rails just kind of become decorative pieces since they're just bolted to the ends of your aluminum extrusion. They're not bolted to the roof at all. So that's the reason I'm not going to go with that method. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut some 3" by 4" pieces of plate steel. I'm going to weld those to the bottom of our rails, and then we'll drill holes for the mounting locations. And I may add some gussets in here for added strength, but that way the outside rails are bolted directly to the roof, and I can mount my crossbars wherever I need to across this. So once I figure out exactly where I want my rail to be, I'm going to mark the location of the factory bolt holes, and then we'll get these mounts welded onto the rails. Alright, we have all 5 of the mounting tabs welded on. I went back and ground down those welds. The next thing I'm going to do is I need to bend these upwards, kind of like that. The way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to cut a deep groove into each one, because this is 3/16 inch steel, so this is not going to bend easily at all. I'll cut a deep groove and I'll bend on that groove. The reason I'm doing that instead of just welding these on at 90 degrees is because the mounting points are not at 90 degrees. So it'll probably be kicked up a little bit back like that. And I'm pretty sure each mounting tab is going to be slightly different. So once we get it bent, I want to make sure each one is perfectly in the right place and that our rail is 90 degrees to the roof. And then once we have it perfect, we'll get all the tabs tacked in place. I also want these tabs to act like spacers. So we're not going to be bending right on the line. We're going to be bending a little bit further down. And it'll act like a spacer, so this thing's not like touching the vehicle in any place. Alright, each of our tabs now have a deep groove in them, kind of chamfered out on each side at a 45. Still can't bend it by hand by any means, but we'll get it in the vise and this should bend right on that edge. Alright guys, after a little bit of work, this looks really good. I just worked on bending these up and down until it all got kind of flat, and this is almost 90 degrees. Still have a little bit of work to do to get it just the right angle. Before I do anything else, I'm not going to tack anything yet. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side, get it just right, and then we really need to figure out how long our crossbars need to be before we start tacking anything in place. That way both sides are perfectly dialed together and it's all straight and squares. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and knock out the other side. Alright, the way that I'm finding the bolt hole locations, I overlaid 2 pieces of masking tape over the center of the bolt hole. And then we're going to put this on top of it and we should be able to see where it lines up. Now that we have our piece on top of the tape, you can see exactly where it's going to intersect. If you just use a straight edge to line up that piece of tape, and then go this way with it on that edge, you can see exactly where those 2 pieces intersect, which should be the center of that bolt hole. So yeah, just a little tip on how to find a bolt hole location. That worked perfect. This thing is solid. Alright guys, look at that. That tape trick worked perfectly. Every single bolt hole is in the exact location that I need it to be. It's the first time I've
I've ever tried that trick. Just kind of came up with it on the fly, but happy it worked out. We have the mounting tabs on both pieces now. Since I already had one made, it was really easy to transfer that over to the next one. Really went quickly. I also took the time to make these little slots on each piece just for adjustability. And I also took off these sharp corners there. I literally just took a broken cutoff wheel to act as my template. Thought that worked really well. I like finding little random things to act as templates. But so what I'm doing right now is I'm working on the locations for the actual crossbars. Right now I have a crossbar every 1 foot. And then in between the crossbars, just like the Prinsu racks, I'm going to do about an 8-inch slot. That way I can mount up any accessories or change the location of a crossbar. But right now I have it spaced where I have 8 crossbars a foot apart, and then I'll need another crossbar right here to hold on to the wind deflector. You'll see that later on. But I'm going to go ahead, cut these slots really carefully, and then drill holes for each crossbar. I'm using my drill press to drill really precise holes on either end of where my slot will be. That way I have nice rounded edges on the front and back of that slot when I connect them together. So yeah, this is just what you do when you don't have a milling machine. Alright, the first slot is done. Really happy with that. I had to be so careful with that cutoff wheel to make sure I had nice straight lines, but I just followed my markings and that turned out really good. So now I just have about 9 more to go, so let's knock that out. Alright, I got all 10 slots cut. I was kind of nervous about these because I wasn't sure if I would be able to cut them accurately enough to where they look good, but I think this looks really good. And it only took me about 7 cutoff wheels, so no big deal there. The next thing I need to do is drill holes between each slot for our crossbars, just like the Prinsu racks. If you hadn't noticed, this is just an ad for Prinsu, by the way. I know some of y'all are probably watching thinking, I'd much rather spend $1,000 with Prinsu than go through the trouble that you're having to go through. But hey, we're having fun. This is fun to me. After I get those holes drilled, I have the pleasure of drilling and tapping 28 holes in our crossbars because I'm an idiot and I didn't buy the aluminum extrusion with the 1/4 tap already. If you're doing anything like this and you're buying aluminum extrusion, get the size that you need and then get it also threaded. It'll save you a whole lot of time. Tapping threads is a huge, huge pain. Let's get these holes drilled. Alright guys, our 2 rails are pretty much done. We've got slots cut, we have holes drilled to mount our crossbars. I haven't welded up the mounting brackets yet. I've been waiting towards the end to make sure everything fits just right. So now we're going to get these guys mounted back on the vehicle with the crossbars, make sure everything fits in place, and then I can start welding up these mounting tabs. So let's get it on the vehicle. I know somebody's going to ask this question, so here goes. These are both crossbars. 32 even. Not bad. I was thinking that was going to be a whole lot heavier. This is all 7 crossbars that we're going to be using. 23.2. So that's a little over 55 pounds. That's not bad at all. Alright guys, check it out. I think it looks so good. I definitely doubted myself at the beginning of this build because this is a pretty involved project, but now that everything's coming together, it looks so much better than I thought it would. Man, it's got me so excited. The only thing I have left to do is kind of fine tune my mounting tabs.
So what I'm doing right now is fine tuning those mounting tabs. These 3 look really good, and these last 2 are kind of bent up a little too high. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking my Knipex pliers, bending down on them until they sit nice and flush with the roof, and then we should be good. So once I have those fine tuned, I'm gonna take everything apart and get it welded up. So let's get to it. One thing I am going to do, since the brackets end right there up front, you might not be able to see this on camera, but if you put weight on the front, you can almost get it to touch the roof. So what I did was I made these little L brackets. They're like at 80 degrees or so. And they fit perfect right behind here. So we'll drill holes, we'll bolt that up, and it'll raise up the front just a little bit and support this front end. Alright, all the mounts are welded in place, everything looks good. I'm just doing a final quick fitment check to make sure nothing moved around too much. Thankfully it didn't. So now I'm moving on to the wind deflector right here. You can see right here, I just have one of the aluminum extrusion crossbars clamped in place. I'm going to bolt that up across there, but this is where the wind deflector will be mounted to keep it rigid. So my next challenge is cutting out the wind deflector to match this curved roof line right there. So we're going to have to make a template for that. So let me show you how I'm going to do that. Alright, so what I've done is I basically made a massive contour gauge. You may have seen these online before, but you use them to find shapes. So what I did was I got a piece of cardboard that's the same length as my wind deflector, and then I'm using wooden barbecue skewers. You can get those at the grocery store. And then I just ran them through the little corrugated channels of the cardboard. And now I can just adjust the skewers up and down, and that's going to hold my shape that I need. This works really well. And now I can take whatever shape, transfer that over to my steel. And then also, if I need it to be more accurate, I can just add more skewers in the channels. But I don't think that'll be necessary for what I'm doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the gauge taped in place, and then we'll adjust all the skewers to get that nice curved shape that we need. Alright, check it out. I think that is going to work perfect. Alright guys, we have the cardboard template on. I think that looks really good. It's probably about as good as it's getting. So I think it's time to take our template, transfer it over to the steel plate, and get that cut out. Alright, let's see how well this fits. That is perfect. I think that might fit a little bit better than the template did. Alright, after a little bit of cleanup, I think this looks really good. And it fits so nicely. Now that we have the wind deflector done, we need to get this thing ready for paint. This thing still looks pretty rough right through here especially. So we're going to break this thing down, take it all apart, and get everything sanded, and get this thing painted. Alright, we have our steel all cleaned up. Everything looks really good. But as you can see, right where we did all of that welding, we still have a lot of pinholes, little nicks and dings and stuff. And I'm not going to go back and fill it with my welder or anything and grind that back down. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of Bondo, get that put in all these little cracks, get those filled because I don't want to see those once I go to paint. Alright, got all that Bondo sanded down. All we're left with is a nice super flat surface. And now when we go to paint, you're not going to see any of those little divots or dings or any kind of like low spots.
So this should look really good once we get it painted. So yeah, it's time to get this thing primed up and get painted.
Alright guys, it's been a few days since we painted. Everything's nice and dry. It's time to do final assembly. Super excited about this. Let's get this thing installed. I'm using some black RTV silicone to seal up all the holes. And then I have these little pieces of rubber to protect the roof from the actual rack itself. So the rack won't be sitting on the paint. It's going to be sitting on these little rubber pads. Alright guys, I hope y'all have enjoyed this build as much as I have. I think it turned out really well. Y'all be sure to like and subscribe on this video. Be sure to leave me any comments if you have any questions. In the next video, I'm going to be showing you guys some products from Beam. Really excited to have them as a partner on this channel. They were kind enough to send me a few products of theirs, one of which is this awesome new light bar. So can't wait to get this thing mounted up onto the new roof rack, show you some of their products. We'll see you in the next video.